The Quest for the Sacred Chalice. Chapter 1. The Hidden Map. The scorching heat of the desert wrapped around the ancient city of Urarkasha, a place long forgotten by most of the world. Nestled between jagged cliffs and a vast expanse of sand, it stood like a sentinel, guarding secrets that had eluded historians for centuries. Beneath its golden dunes lay the greatest mystery of all, the Sacred Chalice, said to grant eternal life to whoever drank from it. Ethan Blackwood was not one to believe in legends. As a seasoned archaeologist, he had seen enough wild goose chases to know that most treasure hunts ended in dusty disappointment. Yet, there was something different about this one. The chalice was not just a relic, it was a part of his father's legacy. Professor Henry Blackwood had disappeared on this very same quest 2 decades ago, leaving behind only cryptic notes and rumors of his death. Now, Ethan stood at the edge of a crumbling excavation site, holding the last remaining clue his father had left, a tattered map that pointed to the ruins of Urarkasha. His heart pounded as he glanced at the strange markings on the map, symbols that only his father would understand. Next to him, a faintly familiar voice broke the silence. "Still think this is a waste of time?" It was Maria Duvall, a historian and old colleague who had been tracking the chalice's myths for years. She had joined Ethan reluctantly, her skepticism matched only by her determination. "I mean, we could be in Paris sipping wine, but no, here we are, chasing a myth in the middle of nowhere." Ethan shot her a look. "You didn't have to come." Maria sighed. "Yeah, but someone's gotta make sure you don't get yourself killed. And besides, I'm too curious to sit this one out." Their partnership had always been complicated, too many close calls in too many dangerous places. But this time, Ethan felt an unspoken urgency in the air. His father had been close to uncovering the chalice. Now it was his turn to finish what Henry started. As the two descended into the ruins, the temperature dropped, and the air grew stale with ancient dust. The corridors, carved into the rock by a forgotten civilization, were lined with cryptic engravings, their meanings lost to time. Ethan's eyes swept over the symbols, piecing together fragments of forgotten languages. "We're close," he muttered, his fingers tracing the lines of an inscription. "Look, these symbols, they match the ones on the map." Maria leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "You think your father made it this far?" "I know he did," Ethan replied, his voice resolute. He could almost feel his father's presence guiding him deeper into the labyrinthine passageways. Suddenly, Maria froze. "Do you hear that?" Ethan paused, listening intently. At first, there was nothing but the soft drip of water echoing through the caverns. But then, a distant sound, a low, rhythmic thud, like footsteps approaching from behind, reached their ears. Ethan's heart raced. "We're not alone." They exchanged a quick glance before darting down a narrow passage, the sound of their pursuers growing louder with each passing second. As they turned a corner, Ethan spotted a faint light at the end of the tunnel. With no time to lose, they sprinted toward it, their breath ragged. Bursting into an open chamber, they were met with a sight that stole the air from their lungs. There, illuminated by a beam of sunlight through a crack in the ceiling, was an ancient altar, and atop it, a gleaming golden chalice. "The Sacred Chalice," Maria whispered, eyes wide in disbelief. But before they could take another step, a voice boomed from the shadows. Well, what do we have here?" "The son following in his father's footsteps, I presume." Ethan turned sharply, recognizing the man emerging from the darkness, Victor Radcliffe, a ruthless treasure hunter and the last person he wanted to see. Radcliffe's cold smile spread as he stepped forward, flanked by armed mercenaries. "It seems your little family reunion just got a lot more interesting. Want to know how Ethan and Maria will escape Radcliffe's trap and uncover the truth about the Sacred Chalice? Subscribe and share to find out what happens next." Chapter 2. The chase begins. Ethan's mind raced as he locked eyes with Radcliffe. The treasure hunter's presence here was no coincidence. He had been after the Sacred Chalice for years, willing to do whatever it took to claim it. And now, with a small army at his back, Radcliffe was closer than ever to his prize. "Did you really think you could just waltz in here and take it?" Radcliffe sneered, his hand resting on the holster at his side. "Your father wasn't so lucky, Blackwood. What makes you think you'll fare any better?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He could feel Maria's eyes on him, silently urging him to act. But Radcliffe was right. This wasn't going to be a simple escape. His father had disappeared on this very quest, and now the same fate loomed over him. Before Radcliffe could make his move, Maria stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "You're wasting your time, Radcliffe. You think the chalice is just going to sit there and wait for you to grab it? This place is rigged with traps." Radcliffe raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh, I'm well aware. That's what the expendable crew is for." At his signal, two of his mercenaries cautiously approached the altar, their eyes darting around for any sign of danger. Ethan and Maria held their breath, waiting for the inevitable. As the first man reached out to touch the chalice, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the chamber. With a deafening crash, the floor beneath the mercenaries gave way, sending them plummeting into a hidden pit. Their screams faded into the darkness below. Radcliffe cursed, stepping back as dust and debris filled the air. "Looks like your little warning came a bit too late, Dr. Duvall." Maria glanced at Ethan. "We need to get out of here. Now." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. Radcliffe's men were distracted, and they had a small window of opportunity. But there was no way they could make it out the way they came. Radcliffe would have them cornered in seconds. Then, he saw it. Across the chamber, hidden behind a pillar, was a narrow passageway barely visible in the dim light. "This way," Ethan whispered, grabbing Maria's arm and pulling her toward the opening. Radcliffe shouted after them, but they didn't look back. They sprinted through the passage, the sounds of chaos and crumbling stone fading behind them. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as they weaved through the narrow tunnels, the cool air of the underground labyrinth chilling their skin. "Do you even know where you're going?" Maria gasped, trying to keep up with Ethan's frantic pace. "Not exactly," he admitted, "but anywhere is better than back there." Just as they rounded another corner, the ground beneath them trembled, and a deafening roar filled the air. The passageway collapsed behind them, sealing off their only exit. They were trapped. Can Ethan and Maria find another way out before Radcliffe catches up? Stay tuned and subscribe to uncover the next thrilling chapter of their adventure. Chapter 3. The Labyrinth's Secret. Ethan and Maria stood frozen, the sound of crumbling rock still echoing through the passage behind them. The tunnel had collapsed, leaving them with no way back. The walls of the labyrinth seemed to close in, the cold air pressing against their skin as they struggled to catch their breath. "This is bad," Maria muttered, glancing over her shoulder at the wall of rubble. "We're completely cut off." Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow and stared down the dark, narrow corridor ahead of them. The only thing keeping them from total darkness was the faint glow of the torch Maria held. He wasn't sure how much longer it would last. "Keep moving," Ethan said quietly, pushing aside his own doubts. "There has to be another way out of here." Maria shot him a look. "Another way? We're in a maze that's been untouched for centuries, Ethan. There might not be another way." But Ethan wasn't listening. Something else had caught his attention, a series of strange markings on the wall ahead. They were unlike anything he had seen before, even in his father's notes. The symbols, etched deeply into the stone, glowed faintly under the torchlight, forming a pattern that seemed to ripple with energy. Maria noticed his fascination. "What are those?" "I don't know," Ethan replied, stepping closer to the markings. "But they look familiar." He traced the outline of one of the symbols with his fingertips, feeling a strange warmth radiating from the stone. Then, as if in response to his touch, the ground beneath them began to tremble once again. The symbols lit up, casting the tunnel in an eerie blue glow. Before either of them could react, the walls of the labyrinth began to shift. Massive stone slabs slid into place with a grinding noise, sealing off certain paths while opening others. The air around them seemed to hum with a strange energy. Maria backed away, her eyes wide. "What did you just do?" I don't know," Ethan stammered, trying to make sense of what was happening. The labyrinth had come alive, as if responding to their presence. Suddenly, the glow from the symbols dimmed, and the walls settled into their new positions. The air grew still once more, but the path ahead had changed completely. Ethan exchanged a glance with Maria. "I think the labyrinth is trying to guide us." Maria's skepticism was evident in her expression, but she knew they didn't have much choice. "So what? We just follow the glowing walls and hope we don't end up dead?" "It's the only lead we've got," Ethan said, determination hardening his voice. "We've come too far to turn back now." Together, they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, following the strange symbols that pulsed faintly along the walls. Each step seemed to bring them closer to something, though what awaited them at the end of this path was anyone's guess. The atmosphere grew heavier, and a strange tension filled the air. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to hum with an almost supernatural force. Maria kept close to Ethan, her hand resting lightly on the revolver tucked into her belt. She had a bad feeling about this, and her instincts had rarely led her astray. After what felt like an eternity of winding corridors, they reached another chamber. This one was larger than the others, its walls adorned with intricate carvings that told a story of kings, wars, and an eternal prize. At the center of the chamber stood a massive stone door, covered in the same glowing symbols they had been following. Ethan stepped closer to examine the door, his pulse quickening. This must be it. The final chamber. Maria wasn't convinced. "And how do you suggest we open it? We don't even know what kind of traps are waiting for us." Ethan's eyes flicked to the symbols on the door. There was something familiar about them, something that tugged at the edges of his memory. And then it hit him, these were the same symbols from his father's journal. The final clue. He reached into his pack and pulled out the worn leather notebook, flipping through the pages until he found what he was looking for. His father had left a code, a sequence of symbols that would unlock the door to the Sacred Chalice. Without a word, Ethan began to input the code, pressing the corresponding symbols on the stone door. Each press sent a shiver of energy through the room, the symbols glowing brighter with each correct sequence. Maria watched him anxiously. "Are you sure this is the right thing to do?" Ethan nodded, though the truth was, he wasn't entirely sure. But this was the only chance they had to find the chalice, and possibly discover what had really happened to his father. As he pressed the final symbol, the door rumbled. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and slowly, the massive stone slab slid open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. A faint light glimmered at the end of the passage, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "The chalice," he whispered. But before they could take another step, a familiar voice echoed from behind. "Going somewhere?" They turned to see Radcliffe and his men standing in the doorway, guns drawn. Radcliffe's cold smile widened as he stepped forward. "I told you, Blackwood," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You're not the only one who knows how to follow a trail." What will Ethan and Maria do to escape Radcliffe's clutches this time? Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe and share to follow the thrilling adventure. Chapter 4. The Descent. Ethan's mind raced, trying to find a way out of the deadly situation they were now facing. Radcliffe's men had their guns trained on him and Maria, and the glint of satisfaction in Radcliffe's eyes made it clear he wasn't going to let them walk away this time. "Well, Blackwood," Radcliffe sneered, "it seems you've done all the hard work for me." "How convenient." Ethan's hand twitched at his side, his fingers itching to grab his knife, but he knew it would be pointless against the firepower they were up against. Maria stood perfectly still, her eyes flicking to the dark corridor beyond the stone door. It was their only hope, but Radcliffe was blocking the way. "You're not going to get away with this," Maria said, her voice steady despite the danger. "You don't even know what's waiting for you in there." Radcliffe chuckled, his cold eyes glinting in the torchlight. "I've been chasing this prize for far too long to be scared by some old legends. The chalice is mine, and soon, it will grant me everything I've ever wanted." He motioned for two of his men to move forward. "Go on, make sure the path is clear. And if there are any traps, well, consider it a learning experience." The mercenaries moved toward the open passage, their footsteps echoing in the ancient chamber. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized this was his moment, his only chance to act. If they could get rid of Radcliffe's men, maybe, just maybe, they could still find the chalice before him. He glanced at Maria, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. They were on the same page. Without warning, Maria lunged forward, grabbing one of the torches from the wall and throwing it directly at the closest mercenary. The Mun stumbled back, blinded by the sudden burst of flame, and Ethan sprang into action. Before Radcliffe could react, Ethan tackled the second mercenary, knocking the gun from his hand. The two struggled briefly, their grunts echoing in the chamber as they fought for control. Ethan managed to land a sharp punch to the mercenary's jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. "Get him!" Radcliffe shouted, drawing his own gun as the chaos erupted around him. Maria ducked behind a pillar as bullets ricocheted off the stone walls, sparks flying in every direction. Ethan scrambled to his feet and dashed toward the dark corridor, grabbing Maria's arm as he passed. "Come on," he shouted, pulling her into the shadows. They ran, their footsteps pounding against the ancient stone as they fled deeper into the labyrinth. Behind them, Radcliffe's shouts grew fainter, but Ethan knew they wouldn't have much time before he regrouped. They had to find the chalice, fast. The corridor twisted and turned, descending deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to press in on them as the light from their torch flickered and dimmed. "This place gives me the creeps," Maria muttered, glancing over her shoulder. "You think we lost them?" "Not for long," Ethan replied, his eyes scanning the dark passage ahead. "Radcliffe's too stubborn to give up now. He'll find us." They rounded another corner and came to a sudden stop. Before them, the corridor opened up into a massive underground chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At the center of the room, resting on a pedestal of black stone, was the object they had been searching for, the Sacred Chalice. It gleamed in the dim light, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward, his mind racing with thoughts of his father. "He was right," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. "The chalice, it's real." Maria approached cautiously, her eyes wide with awe. "It's incredible. But, are we sure this is it? The real thing?" Ethan nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. The legends had always spoken of the chalice's power, but there was something else, something his father had hinted at in his notes. The chalice was more than just a relic. It was a test, a gateway to something far greater. But before he could voice his concerns, a noise from the entrance of the chamber snapped him back to reality. Radcliffe and his remaining men had found them. "There's no escape now, Blackwood," Radcliffe called, his voice echoing off the walls. "Step away from the chalice, and maybe I'll let you live." Ethan exchanged a glance with Maria. They were cornered, and Radcliffe was closing in fast. There was only one option left. "We can't let him take it," Ethan muttered, stepping closer to the chalice. "There's something about this place, something my father was trying to warn me about. If Radcliffe gets the chalice, it could be catastrophic." Maria's eyes widened. "You think the legends are true? That the chalice has?" "We're about to find out," Ethan interrupted, his hand hovering over the chalice. "One way or another." Radcliffe's footsteps grew louder as he approached, his gun aimed directly at Ethan's chest. "Time's up, Blackwood," Radcliffe said, his voice dripping with malice. "Hand it over." Ethan took a deep breath. It was now or never. He reached out and grasped the chalice. What ancient power has Ethan unleashed, and will it be enough to stop Radcliffe? Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe and share to follow their race against time. Chapter 5. The Power Unleashed. The instant Ethan's fingers wrapped around the sacred chalice, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, as if the very walls of the earth were awakening to the presence of the ancient artifact. Ethan's pulse quickened. He could feel the raw power coursing through the chalice, its surface growing warm in his grip. Maria stumbled backward, her eyes wide with fear and awe. "Ethan, what did you just do?" "I don't know," he muttered, staring down at the chalice, mesmerized by the energy pulsing from it. It was as if the object was alive, responding to his touch, unlocking something ancient and primal. And yet, he could sense a danger lurking just beneath the surface, something his father had never fully understood. Radcliffe, still holding his gun steady, took a step forward, eyes gleaming with greed. "You're a fool, Blackwood. You think you can control it? That chalice holds the key to immortality, and it's mine." Before Ethan could react, Radcliffe fired a shot. The bullet hit the chalice dead center, but instead of shattering, the artifact absorbed the impact with a blinding flash of light. Radcliffe's expression shifted from smug triumph to confusion. The air crackled with energy, and then everything changed. A shockwave of light exploded from the chalice, knocking Radcliffe and his men off their feet. The force of it sent Ethan and Maria tumbling back as well, but the chalice remained steady in Ethan's hands, its glow intensifying until the entire chamber was bathed in an otherworldly radiance. "What's happening?" Maria gasped, scrambling to her feet as the ground continued to shake. Ethan held the chalice tightly, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. This wasn't just a relic, it was a conduit for something far greater, something neither he nor his father had fully understood. The legends had spoken of immortality, but they hadn't warned of the cost. Suddenly, the chamber itself seemed to respond. The walls cracked, and ancient stone began to shift, revealing symbols that had been hidden for centuries. As the glow from the chalice illuminated the carvings, Ethan recognized them as warnings his father had hinted at in his notes. "The chalice isn't just a key," Ethan murmured, his voice trembling. "It's a trap." Maria stared at him. "A trap? What do you mean?" Ethan's grip tightened on the chalice as he pieced it together. The legends were half-truths. Yes, the chalice grants eternal life, but it does something else. It binds the soul of whoever claims it. My father must have realized that too late. That's why he disappeared. Before Maria could respond, a dark figure stirred on the far side of the chamber. Radcliffe, still dazed from the shockwave, slowly rose to his feet. His eyes were wild with desperation as he staggered toward Ethan and the chalice, his gun forgotten on the floor. "You don't understand," Radcliffe rasped, his voice shaking. "I need it. The chalice is mine. It's the only way." But Ethan wasn't listening. His mind was fixed on the carvings, the ancient warnings that now seemed all too clear. The chalice wasn't a prize, it was a curse. And if Radcliffe took it, he would unleash something far worse than immortality. "We can't let him take it," Maria whispered, reading Ethan's expression. Ethan nodded grimly. "We won't." In a desperate move, Radcliffe lunged toward Ethan, his hands outstretched to seize the chalice. But before he could reach it, Ethan made his decision. With one swift motion, he raised the chalice high above his head and brought it crashing down against the stone floor. The sound of shattering metal echoed through the chamber, and for a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. The chalice broke into 1,000 pieces, scattering across the floor like shards of glass. The glowing energy that had once radiated from it flickered and died, plunging the chamber into darkness. Radcliffe collapsed to his knees, staring in disbelief at the shattered remains. "No," he whispered, his voice hollow. "You ruined everything." But Ethan knew better. The real danger had been averted. Or so he thought. Without warning, the ground beneath them gave way. A massive rumble shook the earth, and the ancient chamber began to collapse. The floor cracked open, and a gaping chasm yawned wide, threatening to swallow them all. "Run!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Maria's hand as they sprinted toward the exit. Radcliffe, still consumed by his obsession with the chalice, ignored the danger. He crawled toward the broken pieces, his eyes glazed with madness. "I'll fix it. I can still fix it." But it was too late. As the ground crumbled beneath him, Radcliffe fell into the chasm, disappearing into the darkness below. Ethan and Maria barely made it out in time. The stone door they had passed through earlier was still open, and they dove through it just as the entire chamber collapsed behind them, sealing the ancient secrets forever. Breathing hard, they collapsed against the cool stone of the labyrinth's outer tunnels, the sound of the cave-in echoing in the distance. "It's over," Maria whispered, staring at the darkness behind them. Ethan nodded, though a heavy weight still lingered in his chest. "We did what we had to." But as they made their way out of the labyrinth and back into the open desert, Ethan couldn't help but wonder. His father had spent his life chasing the chalice, and now that it was gone, Ethan was left with more questions than answers. What had his father truly discovered all those years ago? And what other secrets had the world's greatest relic hunter taken to his grave? As the sun set on the horizon, Ethan knew one thing for certain: the search for answers was far from over. What mysteries await Ethan as he uncovers more of his father's legacy? Subscribe and share to join the next adventure as the secrets of the past continue to unfold. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.